She's just a coworker, Linda. You're being paranoid. That's what my husband told me, standing in our kitchen, arms crossed, using the exact tone he used whenever he wanted a conversation to be over, before it really started. I wanted to believe him. I really did. 22 years of marriage teaches you to give someone the benefit of the doubt, even when some quiet, uncomfortable part of you already knows better. So I let it go. I made dinner. I didn't bring up the perfume that wasn't mine on his jacket, or the number of late nights at the office that had tripled in the last 3 months, or the way he'd started angling his phone away from me at the dinner table, like it was instinct now instead of a choice. I let it go, because he said, just a coworker, and because some part of me was afraid of what would happen if I pushed harder and found out he was lying. Then, 4 days later, I opened our joint credit card app to check a grocery charge that looked off, and found a 2-night stay at the Marriott Riverside downtown, a hotel 11 minutes from our house, charged to a card I had never once used. On a weekend, he'd told me he was at a work conference 3 states away. My name was on that receipt, my card number, my signature, technically, even though I had never been within 50 miles of that hotel. He'd used my card, not his, mine, either out of carelessness or arrogance, or because some part of him wanted, on some level, to be caught. I sat at our kitchen table with that receipt glowing on my phone screen, and I made a decision right then that would change everything about how the rest of this story played out. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't cry or scream or throw anything. I called my sister, a family law attorney, and I asked her one question. If I already have proof, what should I do with it before he knows I have it? My name is Linda. I'm 49 years old, and until 4 months ago, I believed I was living inside a genuinely solid marriage. Not a perfect one, not one without its rough patches over 22 years, but a real one, built on real trust. My husband Mark and I met in our late 20s, back when he was still finishing his MBA and I was working my way up in hospital administration. We built our life together in the ordinary, unglamorous way most marriages get built. A starter apartment, then a small house, then a bigger one once his consulting career took off and started paying considerably better than mine ever would. We raised 2 children together, both now in college. Both, I want to be clear, completely unaware of everything that unfolded over these past 4 months, because I made a very deliberate choice to protect them from this until I understood exactly what I was dealing with myself. Mark's job required travel, genuinely, legitimately required it, for the first 15 years of his career. Conferences, client meetings, site visits. I got used to a marriage with regular absences, the kind many corporate spouses learn to navigate. I never once, in over 2 decades, seriously doubted where he actually was during those trips. That trust wasn't naive. It was earned, over years, through a marriage that had weathered real difficulty, his father's decline and death, my own health scare 5 years ago, the ordinary grinding stress of raising teenagers. We had been through enough real hardship together that I genuinely believed we'd built something durable. I want you to understand that context, because it matters for what comes next. This isn't the story of a woman who ignored years of obvious red flags. This is the story of a woman who trusted reasonably, for a long time, before the evidence finally became impossible to explain away. The changes started small, roughly 4 months before that hotel receipt appeared on my credit card app. Small enough, individually, that I explained each one away without much difficulty. Mark started working later, not dramatically later at first. An extra hour here, an extra hour there, easily explained by a new client account he'd mentioned taking on. A demanding one, he said, requiring more FaceTime than usual. Then the travel increased. A new client based 3 states away, he explained, requiring monthly site visits instead of the quarterly ones he'd been doing for other accounts. I didn't question it particularly hard. 22 years of a career that had always involved travel doesn't suddenly become suspicious just because the frequency ticks up slightly. I noticed the perfume about 2 months in, A scent on his jacket collar one evening that wasn't mine, floral and sweet in a way I don't wear. I asked him about it, casually, not accusingly. He said someone in his office wore something strong, and it probably transferred in the elevator or a crowded conference room. It was a plausible enough explanation. I let it go. I noticed the phone next. Not dramatically, he didn't hide it constantly, didn't disappear into the bathroom for suspiciously long calls, but he started angling the screen away from me at the dinner table, a small unconscious gesture that I noticed more because of its subtlety than because of any obvious guilt behind it. Each of these things, taken individually, was genuinely explainable. Together, over several months, they formed a pattern I couldn't quite name yet, but could feel accumulating, the way you feel humidity building before a storm, even when the sky still looks clear. About 6 weeks before the hotel receipt, Mark mentioned a name for the first time. Rachel, a newer account manager at his firm, brought on to help with the expanding client list he'd been describing. He mentioned her the way you mention any colleague, in passing, attached to logistics rather than personality. Rachel's handling the Denver account with me now. Rachel and I have a call scheduled Thursday. I didn't think much of the name itself. What I noticed, gradually, was the frequency of it. Rachel started appearing in nearly every conversation about his workday, woven into logistics in a way that felt, after a few weeks, slightly too consistent to be entirely coincidental. I want to be honest about something here. I did, eventually, do what I think many spouses in a similar position eventually do. I looked her up. Rachel's professional profile was entirely unremarkable. Mid-30s, a business degree, a handful of industry certifications, nothing that suggested anything beyond an ordinary colleague relationship. I told myself, at the time, that I was being paranoid, that plenty of married men work closely with colleagues of the opposite sex without anything inappropriate happening. That the accumulation of small oddities I'd been tracking in my head was more likely a reflection of my own anxiety than any real evidence of wrongdoing. Then, one Friday evening, I asked Mark directly, as casually as I could manage, whether Rachel was the reason he'd been so busy lately. "She's just a coworker, Linda," he said, arms crossed, a tone in his voice I'd rarely heard directed at me before, a tone that suggested I was the unreasonable one for even asking. "You're being paranoid." I let it go that night. But something in the flatness of his delivery, the practiced quality of it, stayed with me in a way I couldn't quite shake. 4 days after that conversation, I opened our joint credit card app to check on a grocery charge that looked slightly higher than usual, a habit I'd maintained for years as part of managing our household budget. Scrolling through recent transactions, I found something that stopped me entirely. A 2-night charge at the Marriott Riverside, a hotel located 11 minutes from our own house, dated the exact weekend Mark had told me he'd be at a conference in Denver. The charge wasn't on his card, it was on mine, a card technically in both our names, but one I used almost exclusively for groceries and household expenses, one Mark rarely touched himself. I stared at that charge for a long time, running through every possible innocent explanation. A work colleague staying locally instead of flying home between conference days, perhaps, charged accidentally to the wrong card in some kind of expense mix-up. A hotel booked for a visiting family member I'd somehow forgotten about. Nothing I generated felt remotely plausible once I actually looked at the details. The dates lined up precisely with the weekend Mark had claimed to be 3 states away, and the location was 11 minutes from the house where I was, at that exact moment, sitting alone. I did not confront him that night. I want to be very clear about the reasoning behind that choice, because I think it matters for anyone watching this who might someday find themselves in a similar position. I called my sister, Patricia, a family law attorney with over 20 years of experience handling exactly this kind of situation professionally, long before it ever became personal for our own family. "Before you say anything to him," she told me, "I need you to understand something important. The moment he knows you have proof, he controls the narrative. Right now, you have leverage you will never have again once he realizes what you've found. Don't waste that." Over the following 10 days, guided carefully by Patricia's advice, I did something I never imagined myself capable of. I methodically, quietly, documented everything, without tipping Mark off that anything had changed. I downloaded and saved copies of every relevant credit card statement going back 6 months, capturing the pattern of increasingly frequent work trips alongside a growing list of charges that, once I actually looked closely, told a story I'd been avoiding seeing clearly. Restaurant charges in our own city on nights he claimed to be traveling, a florist charge 2 months earlier that I'd assumed, at the time, was for a client's retirement gift. Patricia connected me with a private investigator she'd worked with professionally for years, a woman named Carol who specialized in exactly this kind of documentation. I want to be honest that hiring a private investigator felt, at first, like something out of a movie rather than something a person actually does in real life. But Patricia was clear about the reasoning. In our state, documented evidence of infidelity, gathered properly and legally, could meaningfully affect how certain financial and custody-adjacent matters were eventually resolved, even in a no-fault divorce state, particularly around expense accounting during the marriage. Carol confirmed, within 8 days, exactly what the credit card statements had already strongly suggested. Mark had, in fact, not been in Denver that weekend. His actual conference attendance for that trip, verified through the conference organizer's own registration records, showed he'd checked in remotely rather than in person, a detail his company's expense reports had quietly obscured through a general per diem line item rather than itemized travel receipts. Rachel, it turned out, lived in an apartment complex less than 2 miles from the Marriott Riverside. Carol's documentation, obtained entirely through legal public records and surveillance conducted within appropriate legal boundaries, confirmed what I had, on some level, already known since the moment I saw that receipt glowing on my phone screen. While Carol handled the investigative side, Patricia helped me understand something equally important that I hadn't fully considered: the financial picture underlying our marriage, and how vulnerable or protected I actually was heading into whatever came next. I learned, during this process, that Mark had opened a separate individual credit card 6 months earlier, one I had genuinely never known existed, buried in mail he'd started intercepting from our mailbox before I typically got home from work. That card showed a pattern of charges eerily similar to the joint card discovery: restaurants, a jewelry store charge I didn't recognize, and, troublingly, cash advances totaling nearly $11,000 over the preceding 4 months. Patricia explained that in our state, marital assets, including money spent during an affair, could potentially be accounted for during divorce proceedings as a form of financial waste, sometimes allowing a spouse to recoup a portion of those dissipated funds during the final settlement. This wasn't guaranteed, she cautioned, and varied considerably based on how clearly the spending could be tied to the affair rather than ordinary discretionary spending. But it meant the documentation Carol was building wasn't just about confirming what I already suspected emotionally. It was about protecting my financial position for whatever came next. I also, during this period, quietly moved a portion of our joint savings into an account solely in my name, not the majority of our savings, and not in a way that Patricia felt crossed any legal or ethical line, but enough to ensure I wouldn't be financially stranded if Mark's response to eventually being confronted turned vindictive rather than accountable. I want to pause here and say something directly, because I think it matters for anyone watching this who might someday find themselves gathering their own quiet, careful documentation before a difficult conversation. Protecting yourself financially during a period of uncertainty is not manipulation. It is not dishonesty. It is simply prudent, responsible self-protection, particularly when the person you're protecting yourself from has already demonstrated, through their own actions, that they're willing to deceive you. 10 days after finding that hotel receipt, with Carol's full documentation compiled and Patricia's guidance firmly in place, I sat down with Mark on a Sunday evening after our kids had both left to return to their respective colleges for the semester. I didn't lead with accusations. I set a folder on the kitchen table between us. The same table, I noted grimly, where he'd told me 2 months earlier that Rachel was just a coworker, and I asked him to open it. He went through the pages slowly, the hotel receipt, printed clearly, the credit card statement showing the separate account, Carol's documentation regarding the Denver conference discrepancy, photos, carefully time-stamped and legally obtained, showing his car parked outside Rachel's apartment complex on 4 separate occasions over the preceding 6 weeks. His face went through several stages as he processed what he was looking at. Confusion first, then something closer to genuine fear, and finally, a kind of resigned stillness that told me he understood exactly how thoroughly this had all been documented before he'd ever had a chance to control the narrative. "Linda, I can explain," he started. "I know you can," I said. "I've had 10 days to imagine every explanation you might offer. What I need from you right now isn't an explanation. What I need is honesty, because everything after this conversation depends entirely on whether you're capable of that." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice considerably smaller than the one he'd used 2 months earlier to call me paranoid, he said, "It's been going on for about 5 months." What followed was one of the most difficult conversations of my adult life, made bearable only by the fact that I had walked into it already knowing most of the truth, rather than discovering it in real time through his own carefully managed version of events. Mark admitted the affair had started at a work conference roughly 5 months earlier, the same general time frame I'd already identified through the pattern of receipts and behavioral shifts I'd been quietly tracking. He admitted to the Denver deception, admitted to using my card that particular weekend, because his own card was, in his words, getting too obvious to his accountant, a detail that told me, more than almost anything else in that conversation, exactly how calculated some of this had become over time. He admitted the separate credit card, the cash advances, most of which had gone toward gifts and hotel stays for Rachel over the preceding months. What he did not do, initially, was take full responsibility without qualification. He offered, at various points, softer framings, that our marriage had felt distant for the past year, that he'd been lonely, despite 2 decades of what I had believed was genuine partnership, that Rachel had made him feel young again, in ways he framed almost as though they were circumstances that had happened to him, rather than choices he had actively, repeatedly made. I let him say all of it, without interrupting, because I wanted to understand exactly how he had come to justify this to himself over 5 months of active deception. But understanding the justification is not the same as accepting it as sufficient explanation for methodically lying to me, spending marital funds on another woman, and calling me paranoid to my face when I'd asked him directly, 2 months earlier, whether something was happening. "You called me paranoid," I said quietly, once he'd finished. "You looked me in the eye, in our own kitchen, and told me I was imagining things, when you knew, completely, that I wasn't." He didn't have an answer for that. There wasn't really one that would have mattered at that point. I told Mark that evening that I needed him to move out temporarily while I decided how to proceed, not as a final decision about the marriage itself, but as a necessary boundary while I processed everything and consulted further with Patricia about next steps. He complied, packing a bag that same night, staying with his brother for the initial weeks that followed. I want to be honest that even in the immediate aftermath of discovering everything, some part of me still wrestled with whether reconciliation was possible. 22 years of marriage doesn't simply evaporate the moment betrayal is confirmed, however clear and thorough the evidence might be. Over the following month, Mark made genuine efforts toward accountability that I want to acknowledge fairly, because I think honesty about the full picture matters more than a clean, simple villain narrative. He ended things with Rachel, verified, again, through Carol's continued but limited monitoring during this period, since Patricia advised maintaining documentation until any reconciliation was fully established as genuine rather than performative. He began individual therapy, unprompted by any ultimatum from me, and requested that we attend couples counseling together, an offer I agreed to explore cautiously, without any guarantee attached to where it might lead. I want to be clear that I did not immediately forgive him, and I did not rush back into full trust simply because he expressed genuine seeming remorse. 22 years of marriage earned him the chance for me to at least explore whether repair was possible. It did not earn him automatic forgiveness or a fast return to the life we'd had before that hotel receipt appeared on my phone. The therapy process, once we began it, was considerably harder than either of us anticipated. Our therapist, a woman with extensive experience, specifically in infidelity recovery, was direct with both of us from the earliest sessions. Repair, if it was possible at all, would require Mark to fully understand not just that he'd hurt me, but the specific mechanisms of deception he'd used, the separate credit card, the careful expense report management, the calculated use of my own card during the Denver weekend, because those specific choices reflected calculation, not simply a moment of weakness he'd stumbled into. Mark, to his credit, did not minimize this distinction once it was named clearly in session. He acknowledged, over several difficult months of therapy, that the affair itself, while deeply wrong, was in some ways a less severe betrayal than the sustained, months-long infrastructure of lies he'd built around it. Separate accounts, false conference attendance, a practiced flatness in his voice, specifically designed to make me doubt my own instincts when I'd asked him directly. I found, during this process, that the calling me paranoid moment bothered me more, in some ways, than the affair itself. The affair was a betrayal of our marriage. That specific lie, delivered so calmly, arms crossed, in our own kitchen, was a betrayal of my own judgment and perception, an attempt to make me doubt evidence I could feel accumulating in front of me, simply because acknowledging it would have been inconvenient for him. I need you to understand, I told him during one particularly difficult session, that moment did something to me that took longer to heal than almost anything else in this entire process. You didn't just lie to me. You tried to convince me that trusting my own perception was unreasonable. That's a different kind of damage. It has been 4 months now since that hotel receipt first appeared on my credit card app. Mark and I are still together, cautiously, in a marriage that looks considerably different than it did before this all began. One built now on considerably more transparency than we'd ever had previously. Full financial visibility between us, regular individual and joint therapy, and an understanding, explicitly discussed and agreed to, that any future deception of this magnitude would end the marriage permanently, without a second chance at repair. I won't pretend this reconciliation was the obviously correct choice for every situation like this, or that it will necessarily be the right choice for anyone else watching this who finds themselves in a similar position. Patricia, my sister, was honest with me throughout this process that plenty of her clients in similar situations chose divorce, and that choice was equally valid, equally reasonable, given what had happened. What mattered to me, in making my own decision, was that I made it from a position of genuine strength and full information, rather than from confusion, fear, or incomplete evidence that Mark could have continued shaping to his advantage. I gathered the truth fully before deciding anything, and that fact, more than any specific outcome, is what allowed me to make a choice I could actually stand behind, regardless of which direction I'd ultimately chosen. I think often about that moment in our kitchen, arms crossed, his voice so calm and certain. "She's just a coworker, Linda. You're being paranoid." I think about how close that single sentence came to working, how nearly it convinced me to abandon my own carefully accumulated instincts simply because he delivered it with enough practiced confidence. If there's one thing I want anyone watching this to take away from my story, it's this: your own perception, carefully built over months of small observed details, deserves more weight than a single confident denial from someone with every incentive to lie to you. Confidence is not truth. Certainty in someone's voice is not evidence of their honesty. It is, often, simply evidence of how badly they need you to stop looking closer. I also want anyone watching this to understand something about the value of documentation before confrontation. I did not confront Mark the moment I found that receipt, not because I was afraid of him, but because I understood, instinctively, that the moment he knew I suspected something, he would begin shaping the story to his advantage. Gathering the full truth first, quietly and methodically, gave me something I would never have had otherwise: the ability to make my own decision based on complete information, rather than whatever partial, carefully managed version of events he might have chosen to offer me first. Mark and I still have hard days. Trust, once genuinely broken at this scale, doesn't fully return in months, and I'm honest with myself that it may take years, if it returns completely at all. But we're doing the work, together, with our eyes open in a way they weren't before. If you've ever had that sinking feeling that something wasn't adding up, despite someone confidently telling you otherwise, I want you to know, your instincts deserve investigation, not dismissal. Trust the accumulation of small details you've noticed. They usually know something before you're ready to admit it to yourself. If this story resonated with you, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Because sometimes, the most important thing you can do isn't to confront the lie the moment you suspect it. Sometimes, it's to quietly, carefully gather the whole truth first, so that whatever you decide next, you decide it from a position of strength, not confusion.